Thank you, gentlemen. Once again, good morning, welcome, and also to the parents and friends who have stayed with us this morning as well. Last year we didn't do this because we only had one gentleman retiring and we did it at the end of the Mass. But this year, obviously, things have changed and we've got a number of people who are leaving. Before I start talking about them, though, I'd just like to acknowledge there are a number of gentlemen in front of me who are leaving today as well, and Year 10 in particular, and there'll be some in Year 11. And they've been here for their 4 or 5 years, and now they're moving on to apprenticeships. And I'd like to say thank you and farewell to those gentlemen for the contributions you've made to being part of St Gregory's. As I said earlier, the difference of being one, the fact that you have been here as an individual, you have made a contribution, therefore it's important to acknowledge that. So to those gentlemen who are leaving us today, I wish you every success with the future as far as your jobs go. But also there are other boys in the college who will be leaving for various reasons, going to other schools or moving house, that sort of thing. And I'd like to thank you for your contribution also. The other group who I'd like to acknowledge, there's a group of teachers who have only been here a short time with us. I'm not going to acknowledge them individually now. I put them in the letter I sent out to the community yesterday. But I'd like to thank them for their contribution also. At times, gentlemen, we have to employ teachers for a term or two when people get sick or various leaves take place. And it's not always easy to find someone to replace them. So I'm very appreciative of the fact that that group of teachers we've had here this year who have filled in for us in temporary roles and the contribution they have made. So I'd like to thank them and acknowledge them, and I'd ask you to put your hands together a way of doing that. As I said, we have a number of long-term staff leaving us today. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge Mrs Murdoch. Mrs Murdoch's been here for 8 years. She came from Broughton Anglican College, where she had a senior leadership position over there. And when the position of HESI coordinator came up at St Greg's, she decided she wanted to move across. And at that particular stage, we definitely welcomed her with open arms because of her experience, and especially the experience she had in the leadership area. But she came across, and one of her forte subjects was the legal studies, and she has done a great job with that over the years. And as I said, it's been 8 years. And when you look at the HSC results she's been able to produce with those gentlemen, she has done very well. Where she is leaving to go to, though, she has a son who's moved up to Mackay, and she wanted to go up there and to the Anglican school on the Whitsunday Islands. It's based in Mackay, though, so that's where she'll be going to after she leaves here tomorrow. But going back to her contribution, it's not only in the classroom where she's made a valuable contribution. I'd say the bigger contribution has been in giving you opportunities. Over the last 7-6 years, she's planned the overseas trips. And I've always said this when we're talking about enrolling people. We do have trips out there and we can go on camps and all sorts of other things, but it relies on the staff. You have to be able to do that. And those overseas trips, one year they go to Vietnam, the next year they do the Western Front. She organises all that. There's a lot of work that has to go into it. She produces a booklet. Passports have to be taken up, insurance has to be got, planes have to be booked, hotels, tours. You could imagine just for one person to go, but to take 30 plus, there's a great deal more effort. And to see what she's done with that, and it's been so successful. The Vietnam one, that goes every 2nd year. And I think she'd most probably agree she's got that down pat, because I don't think a whole lot with that changes except the personnel. But when I look at the Western Front tour, she's very conscious about safety. And the last one or the one before, there was a terror attack in Belgium at the time, and the plane was actually landing in Belgium airport. And she had to go into overdrive to reroute the trip. The fact that she had to change planes, get all the names moved off one plane to another. Those who fly know what I'm talking about. It's very difficult to move people off one plane to another with all the names, and to move one person is a problem, but to move a group is very big. But she made that change to ensure the safety of the group because she saw that as paramount. And whatever she took away, she wanted to definitely bring back. And they would have been richer for the experience of going on that trip. There's a combination of a history trip. It's also getting to know other people who are travelling with you, and picking up a lot of general knowledge as you're going. The last trip she changed a bit further again because again she was worried about the safety, and they did a Shakespearean side as well as the history side of it. And she used to set up a Facebook page so you could follow that trip, see where they've been, what they've done, and it would always go back to the families. Her attention to detail on those things is excellent. She doesn't miss a beat with it. And the other side of it is we don't take any time out of school for it. When they first came to me about it, and I said, well, I don't mind you going, but we're not losing any school time. She said, I never dreamt of taking it out of school. You'd only do it during the holidays. So the fact that when we finish at the end of term 1, usually they're on an airplane on the Saturday morning and they come back in the Saturday or the Sunday before school, and then they're all back here at school on the Monday. To me, the idea of taking away 30 plus schoolboys, travelling around the world for 2 weeks, and in my own holiday time, is a lot of dedication, a lot of commitment. I talked to you about the PACES formula. The perseverance, the attitude, the commitment, the effort all equals success. And I think she demonstrates that over and over again. And to have the stamina to do that for 6 or 7 years in a row says a lot about her. We've been very lucky that she's walked the halls of St Greg's and she's given you those opportunities, because without her it wouldn't have happened. And she moves on today to another chapter in her life, and we wish her well with that, and we wish her every success. But before I bring her up, I'd ask Dr. Malloy to come up, and also Marcus. They're actually going to do the presentations for me this morning. So without further ado, I'd ask you to put your hands together and acknowledge Mrs. Murdoch as she comes forward to receive this gift. Next person I'd like to acknowledge is Mrs. Dean. Mrs. Dean, in my history, goes back a long way. We've worked together for a long time. And also, believe it or not, Mr. Malloy's been part of that travel journey as well. We started back at Lewisham back in the 70s, and Mrs. Dean was a junior school teacher in those days. She'd been at Balmain, came across to Lewisham and took on the art position there. And we were there for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And then I moved on to Balmain and eventually got to Cathedral. In that time, Mrs. Dean had left St Thomas's and Mr. Malloy moved in at that stage, as he was a young teacher, first year out in those days. But when she came out of St Thomas's, she went on and had her children. So she took a fair bit of time off. And eventually she turned up at Cathedral. Brother Hoffman's a gentleman we both worked for, and we stayed with him for the next 12 years. She stayed a bit longer at Cathedral, but the contribution she made at Cathedral was similar to what she made here. Cathedral was a school that was knocked down. We rebuilt the whole thing. And she looked after careers there, and she looked after parents there as well. And she also did the musical there. And one of the key factors about doing the musical at Cathedral was you had to have 700 kids on the stage in one night. So it was a reasonable challenge to take up, and she took it up and did a great job with it. After that, though, I moved over to Pagewood, and she came to Pagewood after I'd been there for 2 years. And in Pagewood, we did the same sort of thing. Then when I left Pagewood, I went to Cogra, and she came over to Cogra to do the same sort of thing for me again. I left Cogra after a year because I got this place and thought, I'm not knocking it back, I want to come. And she stayed at Cogra 1 year just to keep the new principal happily, basically. But then she came down here, and she's been here for 8 years. Talking about what she contributed here, same with Mrs. Murdoch. They all bring their own talents and their own specialities. And one of the things about Mrs. Dean was, being the art teacher, she was very good with colour schemes. And when we started rebuilding St Greg's, she got involved with Mr Vardy, who provided the building side of life for us, and you had Mr Zammett, who provided the finance. Mrs Dean came up with all the colour combinations. So the 1000 maroon, 1000 blue, that's all her idea. All these colours you're looking at here, she takes all the credit for it. When we looked at the music room, and she put in the colours in the music room, I remember Mr Vardy saying, this isn't going to work at all, when he looked at the paper. And yet when we took him up there and showed him reality, he was absolutely blown away by it. And he said she actually does know what she's talking about. I'm not getting involved again. She can pick all the colours for it. It won't be an issue. And she has done that since. So a lot of the building credit here, it's a 3 people involvement, but she's one of them. Then when I look at what she's done in careers, before she came, we had one person who used to do careers 1 day a week. Now, yes, I expanded the portfolio of careers, so we were looking at it as a much bigger option. And when she came, she brought in the work experience, because that's what we'd done before, and we thought it was very important that Year 10 get that work experience at the end of the year, because as we can see from today, a number of the gentlemen are moving on because they've got apprenticeships through their work experience. But we also had boys where school's not really the place for them, not St Greg's, it's just school in general, and trying to help them get through the year at times. She'd organise work placement 1 day a week for them to try and encourage them on the other 4 days. And if they had that carrot, would they come to the party for it? And yes, they did. And did any of them get jobs out at the end? Yes, they did as well. But also, we had a careers market here, which we hadn't had before. And we used to invite all the unis in. We invited various industries in as well. And they would all come together. And they'd come from uptown and out in the west. And they were happy to do it, as long as we had the numbers coming through. And we kept that going, I think, for 6 or 7 years. And the people appreciated that, including the students and the parents. And one of the main reasons we did it was because you can have a careers market over in Ingleburn, and the only people who go to it are the boys, whereas the parents want to be part of that decision as well. And that was the reason she came up with the careers market, by having it here. The other side of life with her is that she's prepared to give her time. Parents get confused about the subject offerings in Year 11. They want to make sure their son is going in the right area. What subjects do they need to be in that particular area? Are they doing subjects that are too strong for them? Do they need to drop down a level? Even the other day, there was a boy who said to me he was doing 5.2, didn't think he could do maths in Year 11. And as soon as I said to him, no, it's fine, you can drop down a level, you'll be able to do maths in Year 11. You're going down to see Mrs Dean now. She'll sort you out and talk to you about apprenticeships, school-based, etc. When I saw him later, he was very happy with life. She just has that knack of being able to wave the magic wand. That's on the careers side of it, and the hours that go with that. And I think many parents would agree. They appreciate the fact that it wasn't a 9 to 3 job in her eyes. She wasn't very good before 7 in the morning, but she was great up till 7 or 8 o'clock at night, and she'd stay there and give them the time. Then we look at the musical. We had a musical here, and we used to have about 300 come to it when I first arrived, and it used to be in the old part of the hall. The only ones who ever saw it were the ones in the musical and their families. When we expanded this, and she did one in the old hall, but when we got this one, we expanded it, and we insisted on Year 7 being part of it. And we had a discussion about what the musical should be, and she finally agreed it should be Grease, and because everyone knew it and everyone would get involved. And I remember that when we did it, especially on the Saturday night, we had about 1,300 people here. And the Year 7s are up the top here, and they had to run down the various aisles in the concert. And as a result of that, it took off. And if you saw Beauty and the Beast 2 years ago, I missed it, but everyone came back raving about it and said how great it was. And I remember there was one boy in it, and some of you might know him. He used to just sit in the yard and read a book every day at lunchtime and recess, didn't interact. But he got into that musical, and he was a changed person. And everyone would have said he was the star of the musical after it. But I think she set up a standard there with the musicals, and there will be a musical next year, and it will be run by St Greg's, and I'm sure she'll be in the background somewhere. But the standard of the musical here has gone up so much, and the credit for that goes to her. The other side of life is the parent liaison officer role. It was something that we tried to introduce in other schools, but it really kicked into gear here. When I first arrived, we used to have a P&F meeting. There'd be 6 people and me. We knew each other real well by the end of the year because it was the same 6 every meeting. But when I brought in the parent liaison idea, we would meet the year 7s, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I went over 3 Mondays. But a 9 o'clock start and then another meeting at 7:30 at night. Some people would balk at all the commitment about the night work. She never did. She was more than happy to do it. And when I look at the numbers of parents we've had come through those meetings in a year, they were up to 300 up until the end of last year. And this year they've gone north of that because of the junior school coming on board, because we added another Monday into it. We were only going to do it for 3 terms, and we didn't want to do it in the 4th term, but the parents prevailed on us and said they wanted another meeting. So we ran a vertical one for them. But it's been a great opportunity for parents. They had me at their mercy and they could talk to me anytime they liked, but they also had her. And if they didn't feel they could approach me about it, they could always approach Mrs. Dean. And at the end of the meeting, I'd usually be standing and having a cup of coffee by myself, but she'd have a line of people waiting to want to talk to her about the problems with their son or where they were going or what they were doing. And I think the other big thing she contributed there was that many parents get lost with the idea that a 15-year-old is feeling down, doesn't know where they're going, what they're doing. And she could always come up with a common sense approach on how to deal with that 15-year-old. And the parents would always walk away feeling so much better after they'd spoken to her. When she was leaving Cogger at one stage for a break, the principal asked her to write out a role description, because he really didn't know it either. That wasn't me, it was the one who came after me. But she wrote it out, and typical her, she only wrote down about 3 things on it. And he gave it to Mr. Reardon, and he said, no, go back and redo it. But they put it up on the board that she was going on leave and who would like the position. Many of the staff saw it was a great job. She wasn't teaching any classes at the time. She was the year coordinator for 10, so she wasn't really in the classroom. And they had the idea she came at 9 and went home at 3 o'clock. She didn't have a footy team or anything like that. She wasn't doing the musical. It was a really great job to get hold of. And there would have been 15 people apply for that job. When Mr. Reardon asked her to redo the role description, she filled it out properly and went on for a couple of pages. Then they posted that. And then he recalled for more applications. And there was only one person who applied for the job after that, because they all realised, if I'm going to take that job on, you've got to be committed. And I think you'd all agree, the commitment, the dedication, the talent she brings, the knowledge, the common sense, the life skills, all of what she's done in that area makes her the person she is. But more importantly, it's what she's done for this college and the impression she's created and the impact that she's had on you. And I think we've been very lucky that she's been prepared to come to St Greg's, and I'm thankful that she's come because she's made my job a lot easier. I get a lot of the credit, but really the credit goes to her. So once again, I'd ask you to put your hands together, acknowledge Mrs. Dean. I'm working my way through the years, so that's why I'm calling certain people up. Mr. Cook's the next one I want to recognise. Mr. Cook's been here for a long time, bordering on 20 years or thereabouts. But going back, Mr. Cook wasn't always a TAS teacher. He actually started as a PE teacher. And going back a bit further, which will tie into where I'm going with this, he also used to run for St George. Many of you would know that he's very competitive. And I think, you know, he did well as a runner in his younger days because of that competitive nature of his. So going into PE teaching was one thing and taking that with him, and he would have loved that. But then he decided to switch over to the TAS side of life, and he came to St Greg's and was doing the TAS for us. There were a whole lot of other things he did, but let's stick with the TAS for a minute. One of his specialties with the TAS was metals and engineering, and he used to rotate each year with Mr. Millett. And when I arrived, I remember seeing one would do it one year, the other one would do it the next year. And the boys would do the HSC exams, And during those alternate years, the boys were getting places in the HSC in the top 10 in the state. So that just shows you the standard of the teaching. You could say it's a standard of the calibre of the boy, and I'll give credit there too, but they need a teacher who knows what they're talking about if they're going to do well. And the fact that they could both get boys in the top 10 is a real credit to them. And to get someone in the top 10 in the state, you've got to show attention to detail. You've got to be committed to it. You've got to care about what you're doing. And you've got to be passionate about it. And I think he's demonstrated that over the years in many areas, but let's stick with this one for the moment. And I know there was one time towards the end when Mr. Millett and Mr. Cook shared the actual class, and they still got a boy in the top 10. Then they disputed who made the greatest impact on the poor young man who got in the top 10. But that was just the nature of them. They were prepared to work together, they were prepared to share it, and they did. They were a very good team. Step outside the classroom. Mr. Cook's made an invaluable contribution outside. Said sportsman himself, loves his sport. Basketball, rugby league. I know when I first arrived he was coaching both, and he had done for a long time. He was always very competitive, as in the coaching of the young men, because he wanted them to do well. They were representing St Greg's. He wanted them to wear the jersey with pride and passion. And he was very good at coaching those boys along those lines. He gave up the rugby league, but stayed with the basketball. And I'd most probably say his passion has been the basketball. He's gone on the Maris Carnivals, and I've been to a few of those where he has been. And he has a great relationship with those boys when they go there. As I said, same with Mrs. Murdoch. When you take boys away as a group, you've got to live together for 5 or 6 days, and it's not always easy because people get sick of each other and all that sort of thing. But he managed to weld those boys together as a team. The fact that they could play together on the field as a team, but they could also live together as a team. He had standards for those boys. I've gone to a few basketball carnivals now, and I've seen other schools in action, and they're definitely not the same as St Greg's. When they had to wear their uniform, he made sure they wore it well. And when people would look around and see the other schools there, when they'd come together on the Sunday night usually, St Greg's was always a standout because he was proud of the uniform and so were they. Their sportsmanship on the court, it had to be good because he wouldn't tolerate anything else. I've seen him pull boys off the court because of it. But he was very good at encouraging and developing along those lines. His other passion is the outdoors. If I could pay him 7 days a week to go camping, rowing, all that sort of thing, he'd be in seventh heaven, there'd be no doubt about it. But I said a lot of the things happen here because of staff. Without the staff, it doesn't happen. When they used to do Outward Bound, I could guarantee he would have been at the forefront of that. For those who haven't had that experience, it's going and living in tents, packing them up each day, moving around through the bush, setting out each night, doing your own cooking, carrying it on you, wind, rain, hail, snow. The heavier the better as far as Mr. Cook was concerned, because his idea of these Outward Bound was, we take you away as boys, but we bring you back as men. And we talk about resilience. And boy, that was dished out in spades on those Outward Bound camps. And the boys benefited from that. They stopped, which he was very upset about because he told me, but it was mainly due to finance because they became very expensive. But that didn't stop him. He came and harassed me then about making sure we had a camp for Year 10 where they had to go out and do things in the bush. Now, you could send them off to a base camp like Narrabeen Fitness Camp, and that was all pretty safe, standard, or the recent one we've been going to is Kincumber. That wasn't good enough for Mr. Cook. We had to go and do more things. So we introduced the Tasmanian Cradle Mount Walk. He set that up. And as you know, we take about 10 boys on that. And again, it's safety first. You've got to do your risk assessments, you've got to have first aid, all sorts of things covered with it. You've got to have satellite phones, beacons, just in case something goes wrong. But he took people on that himself. He'd always take a partner with him, and then the next year he'd take a different partner. So he was teaching the adults as well as the boys, giving an experience to them. And then when he decided he had that all set up and it was running, then he decided the tall ships was a great idea. So he set that up. And the idea of the tall ships was the boys would go out on tall ships, and they'd sail out through the heads, and they'd learn how to manage the ship and sail it. And on the way back, the boys would take it over. And he was more than happy to go with that. And it's not 5-star accommodation by any means, but he was happy enough to set that up. And again, he would take someone, train them, let them have the experience of it, and do it. When I think of what he's done with camping, it's been an amazing contribution, commitment, dedication. There's a passion and enthusiasm for it. We talk about the teachers being the silver bullet. If you have a teacher who doesn't have any passion for the subject or what they're doing, just turns up at 9, goes at 3, doesn't talk to you, it's not great. But you get a man like Mr. Cook come along who has all those other characteristics, and that's what makes the experience great for you. And I'm sure he'd agree, it's not about him, it's about providing the best for you. I think he's done an amazing job with all of that. So his teaching, his sport coaching, the outdoor activities. You talk about a legacy. He set it up, so that's his legacy when he goes away. Those things can continue next year because he's trained staff to be able to do it. And you get that opportunity because of a man like Mr. Cook. We wish him well in his retirement. We hope he stays healthy, because I know he wants to trek through the bushes. Well done, Mr. Cook. Congratulations. Lost the plot there for a moment, trying to keep track of everyone. Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison has been here 20 plus years. I think the first year was 1989 when he came. Once again, an amazing combination. But let's start with the classroom. He's always done the agriculture and the primary industries. He's also been on HSC committees. He's been the chief marker on HSC committees. He's set HSC exams. So that gives you some idea of the calibre. You don't get invited into those things unless you know your subject and you know what you're doing. The fact that he was called in when he first put his hand up and they accepted him, and he kept going back year after year until he decided, okay, I've had that experience, it's better for other people to take it on. We've always got good results in our ag subjects. And again, it's because of his attention to detail and his passion for that side of life. We've had boys to come through the college. As you know, we're an ag college. And at times you might think, will we get the numbers for a subject? But he would always push to keep those subjects out there in the forefront, because we are an ag college and we never want to lose that identity. And he's made sure we don't in so many ways. As I said, HSC, teaching, classroom, what he's had to do there, he's done a great job. Let's move outside of the classroom for a moment. Talk about the shows. We send cattle off to shows, we send sheep off to shows. He brought in the Corriedale sheep here. And that's been a big building program. As many of you know, you hear at lineups, the boys go to the shows and they come home with many ribbons. But it's because of the work that's done back here. We have day boys who go down there and look after them in the morning. We have boarders who put them to bed at night. But there's always a constant concern and care of those animals. They do different things in your classes, you know this. They do different feedlots for some. They'll split them up to see the weight and the variance. Again, it's a hands-on practical activity. But this is the sorts of things he's introduced. With the Corriedales, there aren't a lot of Corriedale sheep, but there's an association, the Corriedale Association, and he's well known in it. I've gone out to the Easter shows and these things with him, and people just walk up to him straight away. Everyone knows him at the shows because he's made such a mark with the Corriedales. He's encouraged boys by taking them to the show. He's always looking for ways to enhance the show program. And it'd be the worst thing ever for St Greg's to lose that. But I think he's laid the foundations for that, and we're so successful at it that it will always be there. You look at the cattle, we take them off to shows, and we do well there also. And when I look at the shows that we go to, and many of you sitting before me know this, we talk about the Canberra show, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. He only takes boys with him who are going to work, and they know if they go, they work hard because they have to look after the animals. It'd be easy for him to get in and do it, but it's far better to train you so he passes the knowledge on. You look at the Easter show. They used to take the cattle there, now they only take the sheep. And the reason for that is when I first arrived 10 years ago, he came to me and said, look, I've been going to the Easter show for 20 years. If you go in where the cattle are kept, they're on the ground usually and they're halted to the railings, but then there's this big box type thing beside it. And that's where people sleep because you've got to have someone there with the cattle at night, just in case they get the ropes twisted around their necks, that sort of thing. And someone sleeps in this tall box. And he told me how he used to sleep on the top of it. And being on the top of it, you're very close to the ceiling. And in those big compartments there, they have sort of halogen lights, and they're on all night. So to be able to go to sleep there is very difficult. And once again, it's not 5-star accommodation. You take a sleeping bag and throw it down on the hard boards, and that's it. But he was prepared to do that for 20 plus years. And I don't blame him, he would have been about 50 when he called it quits. But the fact that he did that and made sure that cattle program kept going so well, but more so giving boys the opportunity to be part of it. Because I know many of you love going to the Easter show and being part of that program. We pulled the cattle out for that reason, because we didn't want to stay there any longer. But the sheep kept going, and we used to be able to leave them overnight and drive in and drive out. Now that sounds wonderful, but it's not that great really, because what they do with the sheep, Mr. Harrison would have been up at 4 o'clock most mornings, coming here, picking boys up at 5 o'clock, Mr. Newenhouse. They drive in, because you only go in during certain hours. They're there all day, and they bring the boys back at night. Most probably get back about 6 o'clock. So it's a long day in anyone's language. And out there, they have to keep the stalls clean, they have to look after them, they're doing show judging, so you're on your feet all day. And it is a very long day. But I'm sure he'd say it's very rewarding from the point of view, they look at the ribbons that they get from it, and he looks at the satisfaction the boys who go get from it, because they get very much positive acknowledgement of their efforts. And that's a great way to do it. I think he's a very patient man. When I think back to some of the one-day shows, and we go to a number of them, we do Moss Vale, do Camden, Southern Highlands. But when I think of the Camden one, that's a Saturday, it's close by. Year 7s always want to be part of the show. And he tends to let them go then, because we can only take so many when we go further afield, because we take the 20-seater bus. But that Camden show, he allows a lot more of the Year 7s to get involved. And they feel pretty good about themselves. They've got the boots on, the jeans, the hats, the check shirts, the tie. And they're there with mum and dad, grandparents from both sides, and usually some of the children as well. And the thing I admire about him with that one is the patience, because the whole family always wants to get a photo with Junior and the family all standing around one of the steers. And I remember one particular day when we were over there, there was no dry land anywhere. It had been raining heavily and everything was covered in mud. It didn't matter where you put your foot, you had a new colour on it when you lifted your boot. And he was trying to deal with all of this at the time. How he kept his patience, I'm not sure, but parents and family would have gone away from that experience thinking this was absolutely fantastic because they had all their pictures. That's the show cattle and the sheep. Then I'll move on to the athletics. He's been doing that since he got here. He's only given it up recently, and he handed the reins over to Mr. Bullock. But he always assured me with the athletics they could do well, and they have done well. As we said recently, last 20 years in a row you've won the aggregate shield, 27 for the juniors. And I'll guarantee the middle group, they've been winning shields too, sporadically up and down, but they've got to win because you don't get the aggregate otherwise. When I asked him what was the important thing about it, he said it was making sure we have one boy in every race and every event. And I thought, well, I thought that was just common sense. But when I got out there and saw how the carnival was run, I realised, yeah, not everyone has common sense because it's not common. And you looked at some of the other schools and you might only see 2 boys going in a race, which meant there were most probably 6 points going begging. But St Greg's never had that problem. And part of the credit is due to you for that, because I know at times when he's gone to go out to the athletics on the day, he might have been short, and you go to the boarding house and say, can someone come and run, throw a javelin or do something? And you'd put your hand up and go. And I remember being out there at times and I'd say to you, how'd you go today? Casually, oh, okay. Did you get a place? Oh, yeah, I won. Right, okay. What'd you do? Threw the javelin. When did you last show it? The invitation guest last year when I turned up, same thing, same result. Real shame. But he used to take all that in his stride. And boys were willing to go out there and do things for him. They hadn't trained for 400, but they'd go out there and fill in that race and run the 400. Then they'd go and back up more. But it was because of him, the fact that they had a respect for him, and he had a knowledge of the athletics. I will say for him, he's one of those glass half-empty types, because every time I'd get out there over the 10 years, and he didn't change his mantra one bit, I'd say, how are you actually going today? Oh, I'm not sure we're going to win. Oh, come on, we must be able to win it. You've been winning it forever. No, look, I'm not really sure about it. And I used to get this same message every time I turn up. He had it down off pat. It was brilliant. And then Mr. Bullock's taken over. And he's very good at mentoring, because Mr. Bullock has got the same repartee too. He just says, yeah, look, it's not real good, it's not real close, we've got a trouble. So he's learnt. But the other thing I'll give him credit for is the way he's mentored people. With him going, it's very hard to get an ag teacher, and one who's knowledgeable, has the experience, but also who's very enthusiastic and passionate and committed. You're going to be an ag teacher at St Greg's, you've got to tick all those boxes, because if you don't, it's not going to work. Mr. Stefanski, old boy of the college, has come back. Mr. McGuigan, old boy of the college, come back. Both of them were involved in ag when they were here. Mr. McGuigan even got the award for ag that year when he left. But he's been mentoring those young men, knowing that at some day he's going to finish and who's going to take it over. And he's set it up so well that we're not going to miss out there. I think you've done an amazing job. I've enjoyed working with you. You've taught me a hell of a lot about Ag 101. I actually know the difference between a sheep and a cow now. But you have done very well, sir. And I'd ask you, gentlemen, to put your hands together, congratulate Mr. Howland. As I said, I keep moving along the line of experience. Mrs. Bunce came to us, I think it was 28 years ago. We've had a debate about that over the last couple of days with some people, but they assured me last night it was definitely 28 years, so I hope I've got it right. Mrs. Bunce came to us from Christian Brothers Lewisham, and we knew a lot of people in common from Christian Brothers Lewisham. We knew what sort of school they had, and the Christian Brothers motto was to do and to teach. In other words, roll up your sleeves, get on with the job, don't say anything back or forward, just do it. Then she came down here to the Maris culture. Different culture altogether, as we know. Yes, we want you to do the job, definitely, but it's the family culture. And she slotted in there so easily, was very adaptable with it. She came, was the year coordinator at the time. She took on year 8, I believe, did that for a year or two, and then took over year 7. Now, you might think about year coordinators and say, well, if you're in 7, you're on the bottom rung. You're in 12, you're on the top. That's not true at all. It actually goes horizontally. And I would say the year 12 is most probably one of the most important year groups. And the reason it's the most important year group is because you come in from other schools. And she had the job of moulding 190 boys together who'd come from 22, 23 other schools and build them together as a unit. That's not easy. You've got to have talent, you've got to have certain qualities to be able to do that. Caring, understanding, compassion, passion for the job, dedication, commitment. You've got to have the positive attitude because it doesn't go right all the time. And you've got to put the effort in. And when you think about year 7, it's a hard time for boys coming in at times because they were the king of the kids back in primary, they were in year 6. But they come in here, they're year 7. No one knows them. They've got to start that ladder, working up to year 12 where everyone knows you. But she took on that role with great gusto, and she did a wonderful job with it. Also in the classroom, talked to Mr. Graham about it, especially the areas of geography. She enjoyed geography, she had a passion for it. Silver bullet teacher, you got the passion, it's going to be good. And I think that's fine with the knowledge side of it, but I think there's a lot more to her than the knowledge and the passion for the subject. I would say her relationship skills with boys is the real thing that makes her stand apart. It's what made her a good year coordinator, it's what made her a good teacher. The fact that she built relationships with boys in the classroom. She didn't have classroom management problems. If she did, she dealt with them. They never ended up on my desk. But I think it was that positive approach she had, believing in herself that she could handle any boy. It wasn't going to be an issue. Because she only wanted the best for you. And when you look at what she did with HSC, yep, she got some great results there. And you could argue, righto, she had some great boys. But once again, the teacher's the silver bullet. If you don't have the teacher, it doesn't matter what boys you got in front of you, it's not going to happen. But she managed to do all that. Those who have filled in as a year coordinator and been assistant year coordinators, in those days she most probably did the whole thing by herself anyway. But going around checking on diaries, if you're a good year coordinator, you're meticulous in that sort of thing. You get worried about boys who don't turn up regularly. You start making phone calls. And she did all that sort of stuff because she believed in it and also she cared so much about it. Of late, she's made another contribution. You look at what happens up here with the flowers. She was here yesterday, many of you would know. She didn't have to come in, but she enjoys doing this. She enjoys doing it for you. And she was prepared to give her the time for it. Now, year 7, most probably don't even know Mrs. Bunce because she hasn't been here this year. But over the years, especially the last 4 or 5 years, I've noticed when she's come in and set this altar up for us with the flowers. And without it, you could set the altar up without the flowers and it'd be fine. But it doesn't have the same ambience. And it doesn't lend to what we do here if we don't have that sort of setup. The fact that she cared so much, and if you watched her yesterday, It was a real love of what she was doing. The way, when I was looking down from up top, to see her placing the flowers in the vases, getting the right mix, making sure it looked good. Because she's got a standard about what St Greg's is. And the standard's a high one. She expected things of you, rightly so, and they were high standards. And that's why she has been successful. It's a long career, I think 28 years here, time before that as well. It is a long time. And I think she'd even agree, when we first started teaching, life was a lot easier. And it's become a lot more difficult in the classroom. And we've had to change our methods of class management. And she's been adaptable and flexible with that. Some teachers get very black and white about it. I told you to do this, you didn't do it. No negotiation, that's the end of it. But she would work you and pull you along on a piece of string, let it out, pull it in, let it out, pull it in, until she got the result that you deserved to get. And again, that's her care and her management. And we talk about love of work being Amara's characteristic. It's written all over her. She loves this place. She enjoys being here. When I first arrived, she also had the wonderful duty, I think she put a hand up for it, of doing station duty. And she was great at it. Part of a daily exercise was put you on the bus, then she'd walk over the top to the other side, see you doing your social activities, break them up, get you back on the other side so you catch the bus again. And she did that for a number of years, until I realised what a good job was, and we took it off her and we allowed her then to come up normal times. But she never complained about it, and having done bus duty down there myself, I know what it's like. So her dedication, her commitment, her attitude, her effort, all talks about success. Congratulations, Jenny. I haven't saved the best till last, but Mr. Brennan's the Deputy Headmaster, and when you're doing farewells, there's a priority. Mr. Brennan's been here for 12 years only, in comparison to the times these people have put in. You might think it's a minuscule time. But what he's done in that 12 years is a great deal, and he's responsible for a great deal. He came to us from Canberra, and I remember when he first arrived, he took over the boarding. And the boarding at that stage wasn't in great shape. There weren't a whole lot of rules, or there might have been. No one seemed to follow them though. And I know with the Seenan house, one particular story he told me, the boys there were very confident in their own ability that they could run the house themselves. So much so that when lights were out, they didn't have to worry about going to bed. They used to go out the back door. But he worked out the best thing there was prevention's better than cure. So he pulled out the old sleeping bag and would lie down out the back and wait for them until they all went to sleep. And eventually they gave that one up because he was prepared to persevere. That got better. You look at the dining rooms, and the dining rooms in those days were pretty rough places from the point of view it was a tiled floor. You dropped a cup on it and it made a resounding sound. They used to sing Happy Birthday in there, and just spontaneously, and the noise was deafening. There was a brother who used to be there, and he used to use a microphone to talk to them. He couldn't just use his voice. And I remember when Mr. Brennan told me how he stood behind the brother at the time and thinking, what have I got myself into? But let's move up a bit. I met him 2 years into the job, and at that stage he'd built a rapport with the boys, and it was a good one. And he was very dedicated. He also realised you've got to put in the hard yards. The hours are the things you're going to have to put in if you're going to be successful. And I remember my first encounter with him. He was driving around the golf cart, had 5 boys hanging off the back of it. WH&S, you would have died. But that didn't matter. They were having a great time in many ways. But I think it was the way they felt about him, the fact they were prepared to support him. When I turned up and he introduced me to boarding, he'd made a number of changes by that stage. You could go to the dining room and they'd have meals over there, and it was fairly quiet and subdued. You didn't have to raise your voice, you could just talk to someone across the room if I had to. The happy birthday thing, he managed that well, didn't have it anymore. But again, it was a reservation about how you do things in a dining room. When I looked at what happened in study, they went to the classes to study, and he managed to make sure it was effective study. They had 3 hours and their results improved because they had to sit down and do the study. They weren't allowed to get up and walk out all the time. He introduced the boarding academic awards because he wanted to acknowledge boys and get them motivated. And when he came, a lot of the boys weren't motivated in boarding. They could count footballs and tell you how many of those they had, but they weren't really interested in their marks. And many of the parents had a go at him because he was trying to make them accountable for their education. And the parents said, look, as long as you're going to be a fine young man, I'm fine with the rest of it. Don't worry about it. But he wanted more from that for them. And he was prepared to push them. And I remember one boy in particular, we were giving out the certificates one night, and he had a broken foot. And I said to Mr. Brennan, I'll take the certificate down and give it to him. And he stopped me and said, don't do that. Make him come up the front. He's never had an academic award in his life. And when the boy got up to me, he was beaming. He was so pleased that we got him up the front. But again, that bears out the point. Mr. Brennan knew who the boys were. He knew all about them. He was able to stop me from rushing in. He used to organise outings for them, and it's been built in these days. And he brought in the idea of, if you didn't get any red stamps, you used to go down to 5O's for a meal. Nothing wrong with the dining room food, but it was just trying to give them an added incentive. And you used to find a lot of the boys in the houses ended up going down to 5O's, and they used to look forward to it. Or if we had West Tigers playing down here, he would make sure we had the tickets so they could go to the games down there. When he first arrived, he took them off to the State of Origin, and that was a big night for them. I don't know how he did it, but he managed to get tickets that were very cheap. Now they're priced out of the market. But he's a man who has connections everywhere, and he was all on about what he could do for those boys to make boarding a good experience for them. Now I remember one night going back into Edgar, and I found a couple of the Year 10 boys, Tom Condon and a few of the others, and they were arguing with each other about their science marks and how one was going to beat the other one next time around. And when I told him that story, he was so pleased because he'd worked so hard to change the culture of the boarding. We didn't want to get rid of sport, but we wanted to lift the academic expectation over there. Then also he needed to keep them occupied on a weekend. Used to play rugby league in the local comp. Mr. McMahon pulled them out of it because of the damage that was occurring. Naturally, St Greg's used to win, and the oppositions didn't appreciate it. So they used to cause damage to the bus and do various other things. So Mr. McMahon thought it was a safety issue, he pulled them out. Mr. Brennan arrived and he said, how about we try and go on the GPS buy rounds and we'll play rugby union on a Saturday. It'll keep them occupied. So they did. They went in and they played rugby against Shaw's Fs or Joey's Fs. And the boys were very good at that because we were very talented teams. Didn't take too much to run over the top of them. But we turned up in all sorts of gear. They didn't make a connection, they were representing St Greg's. I remember him telling me the story when they went to Scott's one day in that year. They turned in Ugg boots, and footy shorts, and just sloppy joes. They hadn't picked up the message that he had a standard. They soon did later on. The next year, though, he got called into a meeting with the GPS. And he knew Ross Tarlington from St Joseph's, who was the headmaster up there. And they were going to say to St Greg's, we're never playing you again because of the behaviour and because of the way you're presenting yourselves. We're not interested in being associated with you. And when Mr Brennan spoke to Mr Tarlington, he said, will you give me one more chance? We can do it. And Mr Tarlington managed to convince them, look, we've got a new man at the helm, he can make it work and it will work. Give him a go. That's why we're in the rugby union on a Saturday, because he managed to get us back in. We were still playing GPS bye rounds, but we started to establish a culture there. They started to get the standards about how to dress. Was it perfect? No. But at least they were presentable. The way they played the game was good. They were learning how to play rugby union. We weren't playing league. But I remember when the first year when I turned up as well, we both made the Sunday Telegraph in the sports pages. And it was a whole page on both of us. How we'd come to St Greg's between us to cruel rugby league and turn the place upside down and make it a union school. And the only part in the paper that was correct, basically, he'd come from Canberra and his name was right. I was an ex-student of Joey's and my name was right. And the rest of it was all creative writing. But we sat down after it, and we've never forgotten it. And we haven't forgotten the journalist either. But we decided we were going to make it work. And we got into the ISA comp the next year. And we haven't missed a beat since. And he developed the ISA on Saturdays. He had staffing through the boarding house who'd take teams. Some of our young PE teachers joined in and took the teams because they got to know the kids that way as well. It was different to Thursday the way it happens. Saturday's a completely different day. But it worked really well for us. First year was most probably misery. They were getting red carded everywhere. Then the next year we got down to yellow cards, and after that things started to kick in. Then when you looked at our results, we started to move up the ladder as well. And people started to have a bit of respect for us. Yes, we're a rugby league school, but we could also play rugby union as well. I got worried then when he started applying for jobs because I thought, how is rugby union going to be sustainable without him? But once again, same as Mr Harrison, he put things in place. He was the one who encouraged Mr Spencer to come up here. And he worked with him on trying to keep this going. And he can walk away knowing now that he didn't have to coach this year because Mr Malicilia took it over and they developed a great culture between Mr Spencer and Mr Malicilia under the guidance of Mr Brennan. So it's set up well, and that'll be his legacy as far as the union goes. Then he moved across into the deputy headmaster role, completely different. No one would understand what the deputy headmaster goes through until you've done the role. In many ways, the demands on your time, he comes in at 7 every day. Depending on what's on that night will depend on what time he goes home. But he's always around. If I need to talk, he's always on the phone for me. When we're in the boarding, we used to walk the boarding houses at night and we'd go home at 10 o'clock. We had very understanding wives. Now that he doesn't live on the property, there'll be times when I will ring him at night because there is a problem and I just want to talk about it before I make any moves on it. He operates out of concern for staff. He operates out of concern for you. And that's why he's available all those times. He had to learn a lot when he moved into that office. We do a thing called Comply Space. It's all about policies and procedures. And he's learnt it and learnt it very well. He had to get involved in industrial relations, something new again. That you don't get trained for any of these things. You've got to pick them up and work them through yourself. And he's managed that. The number of staff who go to him with problems, or parents who ring up, or he has to work with classroom management, as I said, gets dropped in his office, he's got to deal with it. And he does, and does it well. People go to him because they feel a great confidence in him, that if they've got a problem, they know it'll get resolved if they go and talk to him about it. And I think many people would agree with that. I know when certain gentlemen have been called in over various infractions that they've done, they don't go out hating him because they know they've done the wrong thing. He gives them reasonable consequences. They're fair, they're just, they're equitable. And that's about building relationships. And one of his great skills is he's a people's person. And he manages that side of things very well. He's going up to Cairns and he gets to run his own school up there. He's ready for it, there's no argument about that. Because he's done an amazing job here as the deputy. I know that from the point of view that I've been a deputy myself, and I know the person I worked with appreciated what I could do for them. If you have a deputy that comes at 9 and goes at 4, it's not much fun. But the fact that he's prepared to give it the time for you to make this place work and make it great is a real credit to him. But I think once again too, from a family point of view, he's been very lucky to have a very supportive wife, understanding son and daughter. But the energy, the passion, the enthusiasm, the commitment and the dedication, that's what Mr. Brennan's all about. And it's all about you. Congratulations.
Thank you. I won't be breaking tradition by saying anything other than to welcome Dr. Frank Malloy, the National Director of Murdoch Schools Australia. You'll all be aware that Mr. Miller had a tribute assembly some weeks ago, but Murdoch Schools Australia weren't in a position to be here on that day. And when I spoke with Dr. Malloy about that recently, he said, well, I need to know when I can be there to farewell Damien in front of the students. Dr. Malloy had an opportunity last week to come to the Headmaster's Thank You Dinner, which we turned around to be the Thank You Headmaster Dinner. But I know he wanted to come back again today and say a few words about Mr. Miller, so I'll hand it over to Dr. Malloy. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Brennan. Good morning, brothers, special guests, parents, staff and students. I just want you to think for a moment that we've seen Mr. Miller in action today, maintaining his dedication and purpose to the role of principal. But this time next week, he will be officially retired. And when a person comes to the end of their working life, it's a major milestone and a massive shift in one's reality. Catholic social teaching holds that work is a most dignified activity for every person and is intrinsically a good thing. Because we understand work as something that is intrinsically good, we also believe our work contributes to God's creation. For the true Christian, work is not only about securing enough money to live and provide for your family. It's in fact more about how you use the gifts that God's given you for the common good of others. I can think of no other person with whom I've had the privilege to work with than Mr. Miller as an example of someone who has given himself so completely to the good of others. As Mr. Miller mentioned, we've known one another for a very long time. And I had the great privilege of meeting Damien when I was a very young teacher. Straight out of Teachers College, I was 21. And he'd been the assistant principal at this school just in the year before I arrived. It was a year 5 to 10 school in the inner city of Sydney at Lewisham. It was a very crowded campus. And the boys consistently were telling me stories about this Mr. Miller and how he could walk into the playground, 600 boys playing in a cramped space, handball and all sorts of other interesting games. Our average class size was over 40. It was a pretty willing place. Mr. Miller could walk into that playground, fold his arms, and things would be silent. The students would stop what they were doing and wait for an instruction. I remember meeting Damien at a gathering in that first year of my teaching, and I asked him, I said, how have you been able to command that sort of behaviour from the boys? Because as a first year teacher, that's one of the first things you struggle with, is being able to really work with young people and have them listen to you when you need them to. And Mr. Miller's just said very simply, he said, there's no mystery to this. It's just about hard work and discipline. Hard work and discipline. Don't ever forget, if you ask a student to do something, if there's a correction that you're asking that's going to need to be followed up, never forget. I kept that with me very sincerely, and it helped me enormously. I've passed that advice on to every young teacher that I've ever worked with, and that now figures in the some thousands. But that was a lesson that Mr. Miller taught me. When I had the great privilege of being a colleague principal, I was a principal of one school and Damien was the principal of another. We were in the same group of schools in the Archdiocese of Sydney. There was a book written by a very, very fine thinker in the church in Australia, a gentleman by the name of Bishop Jeff Robinson. And he wrote a book about the role of the school principal, and it was called The Privilege and the Challenge. The privilege to lead young people like yourselves and the teachers that work with you in this great enterprise of Catholic education, and the many, many challenges that such a role provides. So it is a great privilege to be a principal. It is also an enormously demanding job. I often, as I read that book, I've read it over and over again, I've lectured to staff, to young people moving into principalship using that book, and Damien Miller has been always present in my mind as the example that that book describes. He always has accepted the role of principal as a great privilege, and he's taken on the challenges with great courage and enthusiasm. The thing that is the most dominant thing in my mind about Damien's contribution to Catholic education, not only here at St Greg's but elsewhere, and it's something that colleagues have spoken to me about in these last few months as this conclusion to a wonderful career has been coming closer. And that is that Damien's respect for people and his respect for education is what really is quite transformative. It transforms those that he works with and those that he's with in a school setting, because he has such strong commitment to the great benefit to a human life of a good education. It's something no one can take from us. And it's that respect which has driven his actions from the first day that he has become a teacher and now a school leader. As a Marist principal, Damien is also someone who excels, and he is an example to many of us. We're a network of 55 schools, and again, Damien would be an exemplar to all of the principals across those schools. Already this morning we've heard a whole lot of qualities of Marist educators mentioned. In Damien's case, one of the things that first comes to mind is simplicity. That is a characteristic named in Marist education as a very important thing. And there's genius in simplicity. And Damien's intelligence in the way he approaches problems, the way he approaches challenges, the way he has strategically led this college is an absolute testament to that characteristic. He's been able to do it with such clarity of vision and make it simple for others to follow and understand. His presence is legendary, not only here at St Greg's, but in all of the schools in which he worked. The number of boys that are now young men, and some even getting close to middle age, that can tell hilarious anecdotes about things they were up to, and Mr Miller appeared like magic. And I know that that would resonate with many of you here. But the presence that he has shown here at St Greg's, with your incredible education that you do have here, it's not just a day school, it's a 24/7 school that offers so much for you in the co-curricular life. And Damien's made it his business to be as much of that as possible, and to know you and to know what you're doing and to enjoy your success, enjoy the satisfaction you get from those very important activities. One of the great contributions from Mara Schools Australia's point of view of the contribution of Damien Miller to St Greg's has been the creation of the junior school, the primary. Now that is a massive undertaking. In many dioceses, if you're starting a new school, they'll appoint a principal a full year before it even starts. There's so much to get ready and so many things to work out. Mr Miller took that challenge on in a heartbeat. We spoke about the demands for Catholic schools in this part of Sydney. We spoke about the conversations we'd been having with the Bishop of Wollongong. We spoke about whether or not we could contribute in this way, and Damien very, very quickly said yes and undertook to make it happen. The amount of hours that's gone into that and the reality that we now have down the road there is really, I mean, it speaks for itself, and it's just a very physical reality that is, again, testament to the skills of Damien Miller as an educational leader. And it reflects that great Marist value of love of work. When we talk about family spirit, Damien's attitude and involvement in the Marist network very broadly, and in Catholic education more broadly, is always one of collegiality. When he speaks with people in other schools, it's not about our school versus your school. It's always about how is that working well for your students? How are we working together to make Catholic schools the best schools we can? And I've really, really appreciated in my role the great support and wisdom of Damien Miller. And he's always someone that when I speak to him about challenges that I might be facing or particular directions we're seeking to go, he gives very good advice, and it's always coming from the point of view of what is going to be the best for the young people that we're working with, and the ones that we haven't yet worked with that we want to work with. Damien is a very humble person. We know that was one of the great qualities of Mary, our good mother. Damien has been going to great lengths to avoid me saying anything publicly about him before he retired. So I'm delighted to be here, and I feel very privileged, and I know that I'll be suffering for some years to come because of it. But Damien, on behalf of Mara Schools Australia, I wanted to say a sincere thank you, and on behalf of all of your colleagues that you've worked with over many, many years in Catholic education, thank you. Thanks for your great humour, your great example to us, and for teaching so many of us how to be better at what we do and and teaching us how to love doing what we do. Thank you, Damien Miller.
I just said to Mr Miller on the stairs coming up that we're not going to break tradition, and he doesn't get a right to reply either, so he's had to sit straight back down. But what we are going to do just briefly before we go, which is a little bit of a break in tradition, is our Year 12 music class have put together, recently performed a piece at a primary school thing. And this isn't just for Mr Miller, but when you look at the collective of Mrs Dean, Mr Miller, Mrs Bunce, Mr Cook and Mr Harrison, we're losing almost 200 years of education in one day. So with retirement comes age, and with age comes experience. So as these fine 5 people are moving on to the next stage of their lives, you'll all know who've been part of Year 12 graduations. We bestow a blessing on to the Year 12 cohort as they go to their next phase. And today we've got our Year 12 music class who would like to pay a particular blessing to our 5 retirees. Thank you.
As I bow my head in
Thank you, gentlemen. What a fitting way to finish on what's been a lovely day for all of us that are leaving the school, and particularly for our 5 retirees. Gentlemen, we still have quite a bit of the day to go, and I'd just like to go through just the rest of the day, and then we'll invite our parents and official party to leave. But you'll go to lunch now, and can I ask that, with only hours remaining, that you are conscious of the fact that we all want to finish well. We all want to finish very positively. And I know I spoke to a couple of boys at morning tea about some choices they made, and I really hope that we can, as a community, start our holiday break this afternoon on a very positive note. When you're dismissed from here, you'll be moving to lunch, and I'd ask that you follow the bells, and on the bells at the end of lunch at Year 7, you'll go to the seats at the top of St Greg's 1, the main rugby league, rugby union field there. Year 8, you'll meet at the basketball courts, and then you'll be moving to another venue from there. Year 9, you'll be coming back to the hall to meet Mr Hogan. Year 10, initially, you'll be moving into homeroom. And Year 11, you'll go to homeroom, and then you'll be moving to another venue as well. Again, under the instructions of year coordinators at the conclusion of that, and in that time, you'll receive your college yearbook that arrived today and your college calendar. Thank you. We'll then be coming back together as a community about 2 o'clock for our end of term lineup upstairs, where you'll receive your reports before being dismissed to get picked up and jump on buses as you normally would. So we'll have an opportunity to say goodbye there. But can I ask now, under the direction of Mr Anderson, if Year 8 would like to move out the side doors, the official party when you're ready. Year 10, whenever you're ready,